Thank you very much, Christy. So hopefully we didn't kill Big Blue Button with the attempt at a group photo. So let's see if this works. Second. Okie dokes. So I don't know if this works. No, seems that the clicker doesn't work. Great. So, hello everyone. I'm Emmanuele. I will be talking to you about being a GNOME maintainer today. So, as I said, I was Emmanuele. I'm Emmanuele. My preferred pronouns are he and him. I work for the GNOME Foundation on GTK. And the reason why I'm doing this talk is because I maintain a bunch of projects over the course of the past 15 years, I think. Yeah. So a little bit of a disclaimer first. This presentation is not going to be technical at all. I'm not going to spend any time teaching you how to use GitLab or how to make release tarballs or how to upload documentation to the GNOME infrastructure. That stuff is transitory, and it doesn't really matter. It's also not going to be a talk in the form of a listicle with like 12 things you don't know about being a GNOME maintainer, and the 7th one will surprise you. That is not that kind of talk. Most of the information in this presentation is pretty much common knowledge, or at least it should be, but it's common knowledge that we currently require people to learn through the years and by being a maintainer instead of telling them up front. So this is what my talk is about. So let's start with part 1. My road to maintaining GNOME modules started when I offered to help fixing the dictionary panel applet. At the time, it was part of the GNOME utils repository, which were a project that dated back to the pre-1.0 era of GNOME. So it had a long history of contributors and maintainers, and fixing the dictionary required a complete rewrite of the existing code in the application, and then reusing the code in the applet. If you don't remember what a panel applet is, you're lucky. If you do remember, I'm sorry for you. I almost managed to completely recycle the knowledge involved, so great for me. At the time, I was mostly language binding contributors, and I had just recently started contributing to GTK and glib for the recently used files infrastructure. So this was my first attempt at writing actual application code that would be used by somebody else. After about 6 months, I landed the new dictionary application source code in the repository, and I started doing releases of the GNOME utils project when the original maintainer sent me an email saying that he was in the middle of a move from the US to Europe. And if I were to be so kind to spin up the distribution archives for GNOME 2.11, it was going to be GNOME 2.12. Of course, after he asked me and started moving, I never heard back from him again. So this is the well-known tag-urit model of maintainership transfer. The path of each one of us towards maintenance is different. This one was mine. It's kind of common in some cases, but other people will have other experiences. And this presentation is also my personal journey. These are my personal recommendations. I do not pretend to be the only source of truth in how to be a maintainer for GNOME or otherwise. All I have to offer are 15 years of involvement in this community and a bunch of software releases, some scars from flames, and pretty much deep and fairly entrenched cynicism about software development and free software in general. So do what thou wilt with this knowledge. Another slight disclaimer, since this presentation is also the result of my personal journey, I reserve the right to contradict myself and blatantly ignore any recommendation. I'm a complicated man. Again, you should feel free to pick and choose what you think is best for you. I live only to serve as a warning. So, if you've seen Jonathan Blanford's presentation in 2017 in Manchester, the GWADEC in Manchester, you will see that you will recognize this image. This is the GNOME motto, the coat of arms. GNOME populum est. GNOME is people. There is another thing that is made out of people. So, like Soylent Green, maintaining free software project will take your body, mulch it down until it's space to be consumed by somebody else, and it will only leave your hollowed husk behind. By the way, if you didn't know about Soylent Green, I'm sorry to spoil you a 47 years old movie. The trailer, to be fair, spoiled it for us anyway. Unlike Soylent Green, though, GNOME is also made of two other components. One is software, which is written, designed, documented, and translated and tested by the aforementioned people, and processes, which are followed by the people in order to produce software. So if we put people on one end of the spectrum and software on the other, we get a nice little diagram on how to turn people into software. We celebrate the people that make the software, and rightly so. They are worthy of celebration. And of course, we also celebrate the software releases when we do large videos. We do videos to celebrate our release. So it's something we do. But the bits and blobs in the middle, the process step, are kind of obscure in many cases. They are often so obscure that the people involved in the GNOME project discovered them long after they joined it. So this is my main objective for this presentation, is to present the processes, including the bear traps that have been cleverly disguised in the tall grass, and possibly at the end, spurn people into figuring out better processes. In general, I'm trying to improve the communication across the project, the GNOME project. Mostly because software is a thankless job. Maintaining it is a thankless job. I've learned a bunch of this lesson in the hard way, in some cases. Back when I was dropped in front of a GNOME module, we only had a wiki page that outlined the process to make an AutoTools release and publishing it on our file server. Everything else I had to learn by observing other maintainers, or I had to ask other maintainers, or I had to experience it personally on my skin. So let's go to part two. Maintaining free software, other than being a thankless job, is also pretty complicated. It typically involves a single person doing the body of work of the equivalent of a team in a proprietary or commercial setting. We're talking about development. We're talking about Q&A. We're talking about QA, not Q&A, sorry. We're talking about client feedback. We're talking about infrastructure, marketing, documentation, evangelism. It's a lot of work for a team, but it's an incredible amount of work for a single person. And you can decide to stick to coding. It's perfectly fine. You're just that, a coder, right? You're just developing your project. Lots of free software projects are just that, a single person doing something they want, scratching their own itch, until they either burn out or they move on to something else. Or you can decide to involve different people in the effort. But then you become a team lead and you get to manage people more than managing software. And the important thing to understand about maintaining people in general and software in general is that it's not about software at all. Software is the easy part. People are far from easy. They do not scale. For a start, you will always have fewer people than the ones you need to match the scope of the project that you have. Because as soon as you add more people, you will try to make the scope bigger, and then you will fall back to square one. And when you are the only person maintaining a project, you are the component that does not scale in this picture. You are the bottleneck. You are going to be the point of failure in this. There are also some fundamental truths about users. Like, users do not know what they want. They barely know what they want to achieve sometimes. They definitely don't know how things work. They do not know how to give feedback out of the box. It's not it's an acquired skill. It's not something that comes naturally to human beings. But users are fundamental because they are the source of new contributors for a free and open source software project. They are the source of motivation for people contributing to it. And they are the main source of demotivation for the people contributing to it. In general, users are the fundamental shaping force of any free software project. And by the way, you're a user too. So all of the above apply to you as well. Because unless you write software that you never use, like say you're writing the free and open source software stack for interplanetary probe or a nuclear power reactor, you are going to be the one person using the software you're writing, which is the reason why you wrote the software in the first place, right? So another thing that happens when you start involving other people in any role in your project is that you will need access to high bandwidth and low latency communication channels, like say chat or video conferences or hackfests and conferences. Like when those were a thing that we could do, those were very high bandwidth and low latency communication channels. Anything else will not scale unless your project is very slow moving. If you're, even in that case, like say you're maintaining the GNU C library, it's fairly slow moving project, or at least it was a fairly slow moving project. So it doesn't need to have video chats every week or something, but not every project is that kind of project. And once you involve other people, you need a way to transfer knowledge from your head into theirs. As they say where I'm from, nobody is born already learned. Yeah, you had to learn how to do your job, so you should not be at all shocked if somebody else needs to do the same. We don't have good ways to transfer knowledge. In free software community, and in GNOME in particular, sure, we can dump a bunch of text files into the source code repository or write down a bunch of wiki pages, but everything tends to go out of date for the same reason why writing a book against a free software library is a Sisyphean task. Things change, often way too fast for the documentation to keep up. Even best practices change. For instance, on the infrastructure side, 20 years ago, we were using CVS to store our code and Bugzilla to track issues. The contribution model was incredibly different from today. 10 years ago, we had just moved away from Subversion and we were using Git, or we were using Bazaar, or we were using other distributed revision control services. We still had Bugzilla, but the contribution model was, again, different. 5 years ago, we didn't have GitLab. And in 5 years' time, we will hopefully still be using GitLab, but GitLab by itself will probably look fairly different than what it does now. GNOME offers you a bunch of services to handle this kind of thing, this kind of communication channels and knowledge transfer for any project that it's hosted on its infrastructure. You should not try to reinvent your own. Don't try and go at it alone. Don't use a different chat service. Don't create a random mailing list on SourceForge or whatever else. Because by using shared services, you let other people in the project, in the GNOME project, reach you, know where to find you, and communicate with you. But also, if you're consistent with a project, we have a single point where people from outside the project can reach you. Also, there is another thing about communication channels that can be used and should be used to train and help other people that want to help you maintaining a project. And basically, this is like a form of mentorship. You have to try and do this. You are, as a maintainer, responsible for teaching new contributors on how to do your job and bring them up to speed. Of course, this means less time for coding. It's a trade-off, right? You also should not wait until Google or Outreachy or whatever else comes around and pays a bunch of people to be your interns for a season. You should proactively write down what an intern should do and should know before that happens, even if that doesn't happen. Maintaining a project is also based on top of a lot of stuff that happens behind the scenes that you have to care about. Because from the outside, all of these things that are listed in this slide, design, CI pipelines, localization, documentation, nightly builds, they happen by sheer magic. Like elves appearing at night, making shoes for the poor shoemaker for him to find them in the morning. And nothing could be further from the truth. Each and every one of these things happen because somebody is putting time, is putting effort, is putting blood, sweat, and tears in them. Their time is not in any way, shape, or form less precious than yours. Their motivations are not any more spurious than yours, and their commitment is not any less complete than yours. They are experts in their field. And just like you're an expert in how to string together two statements and a condition and running a compiler, then they are experts in design. They're experts in localization. Do not try to do your own thing there. These are a bunch of services that the GNOME infrastructure provides you, like GitLab for hosting code and running CI pipelines, damn for translation, help.gnome.org when it works for showing application help and localizing the application help, and the GNOME build meta, which builds the entirety of the GNOME stack and generates VM images like we've seen on the first day of Guadec. But also the runtimes for Flatpak so that we can build our applications against them. On top of that, GNOME also has a bunch of people dedicated to ensuring that the people involved in the project talk to each other and resolve their differences in a constructive way. You should figure out how to talk to each one of them and keep them in the loop before and after you've written your code. You should talk to the design team before you go on and do your own thing. And you should talk to release team whenever you add and remove a dependency to your project so that the release team knows how to build your application and your library. You should also use the code of conduct team to resolve problems when it comes to communication between people inside the GNOME project and communication from people outside of the GNOME project. And you should also contact the foundation board for sponsorship and organizing Hackfest and things like that. We have all of these people that are there to help maintainers doing the best job they can. So you should involve them. We all sacrifice something of our individuality when we work together, but what we gain is greater than what we lose. We have to give up the sense of power and importance in maintaining a little fiefdom, where every decision is yours and yours alone, and where your word is the law. But in return, you get help, you get knowledge, and you get a shared sense of purpose. This is what being a community means. It sounds trivial, but you'd be surprised. People really think that they can maintain their project like a little isolated kingdom, whereas they are a part of GNOME. And the important lesson that working in GNOME teaches you is that it's not all about you. It's not the software you write, not the API you provide, not the UI you design. Of course, this doesn't mean that you're not writing software to scratch your own itch or to solve your own problem. But whenever you start writing software, whenever you release software, you have to think of other people as well, not just yourself. And outside of Foundation Board, Code of Conduct team, and release team, there are other ways to deal with conflict and with decision making, rather than having maintainers duke it out among themselves. Some of these alternatives, like rough consensus and the steering committee, they have been used by GNOME. The release team used to be the GNOME steering committee before the foundation even existed. And then it was redesigned to be something else. GNOME never had a benevolent dictator for life, self-appointed or not. Not even Miguel was that. So we never tried that, but it's way too late to do that now. But it's an option for a single project to do something like that. You could use the feedback. But at the end of the day, the important thing is that you have to make a decision, and you have to do that by using every single tool at our disposal to make the best decision you can. Regardless, we are a free and open source software project, and we've had everything on this list. So from flames to character assassinations over Planet GNOME, to passive-aggressive emails to other projects making similar decisions to revert wars on the Git repositories, to forks. There's nothing that free software projects like more than having a circular firing squad. But assuming you don't want to burn your bridges and leave the project, you will have to compromise, and you will have to try and agree on a minimal platform and build from there. In many cases, it's just miscommunication. You should take advantage of the resources GNOME provides to explain your position, not over-explain it, but explain it and listen to other parties. You might end up resolving your problem more quickly or figure out a different approach. You might even figure out a better one. The stranger things have happened. So sometimes you will propose a thing, or somebody will propose you a thing that has already been proposed 1,000 times. It happens. You're not as clever as you think you are, as a general rule. I know I am not, and neither are the other maintainers. But they have probably been on the receiving end of the same stuff over and over again. So if you are the ones asking this thing that has been already asked a million times. Do not pretend everyone dropped what they're doing to answer your question. And do not make up fantastical stories based on half-heard rumors. Just ask for information. You will likely get one, or at least you will be pointed in the direction of one. And if you are a maintainer, yeah, not every decision is or can be notarized. In some cases, every decision is the result of a long discussion that's been going on for weeks, months, or even years. In some cases was taken in a very different context or venue, and you don't go around all day with a microphone recording every single decision you make. Nevertheless, you should put some time into writing down the common decisions that you make. It saves you time in the long run. If fate selected you to repeat yourself every month on every platform in existence about the same things, you should keep links handy. Write them down in a document. Nobody will read the document anyway at first, because of course they won't. But it is easier for you to point at the document instead of wasting 2 hours of your time writing down the same stuff over and over again, making your blood pressure skyrocket and burning you out. Another important thing is sharing the ownership of what you maintain. People care more if they feel responsible for something. You should use the natural sense of belonging to an in-group, to herd contributors like cats towards a single direction, instead of having everyone else pull along different vectors. The shell developers are great at this. They trade reviews, they have clear maintenance roles, they have shared sense of ownership of the project, all of which enables new contributors to hit the ground running. They know who to ask for a review. They know what to do in order to get some code reviewed. It's great. You should follow their example. They are a great team of maintainers. But also you should write everything down. You should document your process, even if it feels obvious, even if it's common knowledge, even if it sounds incredibly stupid, like how to write documentation, how to write your code, how to contribute a new feature, or how to write issues, how to triage them, how to review a merge request, and how to make a release. People do not know what they know until they know it. And you do a release, you land a feature, you do something good, and you will get good feedback from it. You get positive feedback from it. One of the important things is that if you have a plan before you do all of this, people will follow. It's the uncertainty that makes people uneasy. They do not know how to contribute. They do not know how you will handle bug reports. They will not know how you will accept a feature or not. Basically, people do not know how to manage you. You have the power, which means people will have to know how to deal with you in this power differential dynamic. You shouldn't be passive. You should thank people for their patience and do not apologize for your delay. It's an important thing. It's an interesting distinction. People will be much better positioned to accept that thank you instead of you're sorry. And another thing that makes me, it makes me really sad when I see this. Do not be self-deprecating. Do not insult the thing you make or the community you're a part of. Even if it's like humor, do not do that, please. People use your software, people participate in your community. If you belittle what you do and who you are and the community you're indirectly telling them that they choose an inferior solution. You should celebrate what you do. You should celebrate the community you're in. Even when you have clear in mind their limitations. You should never, ever, ever put them down. You should never make them look like a bunch of amateurs or a bunch of people that do not know what they're doing. Again, a lot of people have this weird sense of humor. I do too often, but you should never do this in a public setting. Doing this among us, it's fine, but well, fine, but it's something that is important. Do not do this in a public setting. You're just tearing down all the goodwill, and you implicitly give ammunition to the people that are trying to tear down the community. Because people will always hate stuff, even when it's offered to them freely at no cost. People suck. People who have a problem will invest time and effort in trying to figure out a solution and inject their personal feeling into what they do. You should not be surprised at all, because you do the same. You are maintaining free software. You have to remember that once time and effort are spent and a solution found that satisfies the requirements of a single person, it's still entirely possible for that solution to fall short of your standards. Not everyone is willing to iterate on a solution once they're satisfied. Not everyone sees the long-term issues of your solution or the integration issues of the solution. And most people will always think that their time is more precious than yours. The important thing to learn is that you cannot logic them out of that. It's not a logical position. Nobody writes code in a frictionless void. Programming is not a logical endeavor. Logical is a lie. It's at the very core of our profession, but it's a lie. Because programming is deeply and subtly emotional. It taps into a lot of places that are core to your identity, to your personal history, to your memory, and to your present context. You cannot detach the code from who you are as a person. This means that you have to appeal to emotion, to empathy and sympathy. You have to create a human connection. So in order to make this human connection, you should not make people wait too long for an initial answer. You don't have to immediately context switch every time you get a notification on GitLab, because that would be terrible. You should at least give the indication that you're reading things. You should triage. Because it's great. Or should get somebody else to triage, because again, it's great. It saves time down the line to find the interesting things that you have, or the important things you have to fix. You should spend more time there. You should tag issues on GitLab. That is great. You should use emoji buttons. Once you use an emoji button, you give out feedback. It doesn't take more than 2 seconds. It doesn't require you to write an entire comment. Just click the button and you will also get automatically subscribed anyway. So it's great. You should show that somebody human is on the other side of the screen and they're trying to make a connection to you. But also you should plan for the moment when you decide to leave a project. Guido van Rossum left his position of benevolent dictator of the Python project after nearly 30 years. You are not Guido. I can guarantee you that you're going to get bored or burned out long before that. So you should take breaks just to see what happens. But do not ghost people, because that's very rude. You should nominate lieutenants that will do what you're doing in your absence. And when you're not writing code, you should provide historical context and institutional knowledge. Why something was done this way, what was the context at the time of the decision. Not the entire thought process, but what were the requirements for this to happen at the time. You should plan ahead, as I said, and if everything else fails, you should archive the code repository. Nobody will ever hold it against you if you decide to leave your project, as long as you have an exit strategy for it. Archiving a project is a 2 minutes thing. You open a bug on the infrastructure GitLab page, and unarchiving a project is another 2 minutes thing. It's fine. You can do this. And once a project is archived, it's known that nobody's going to fix it, or nobody's going to add new feature, or anything will happen to it. So you're a GNOME maintainer. You're a part of GNOME, which means that people will love you, people will hate you, people will think you've done a ton of research for everything you do, and people will think you're an arrogant asshole who thinks they know better than everyone else. People will never understand how much code you write, both in the positive and the negative. People will not understand why you haven't left to work on a farm yet. But most important of all, people will think that you're part of a hive mind that lives and breathes GNOME decisions all day, every day, 365 days per year. You're always on the clock, even and especially when we all know, once you become part of the GNOME project, that there's at most an egg timer, not an entire clock. So instead of trying to speak every time about anything related to GNOME, you should try and get somebody else to speak for you. You should not be a hero and make everything worse, including your own mental health. This is important in order to manage a public relations situation. You should involve the engagement team. You should talk to an engagement team when you have to deal with fallout of any decision. And you should get the moderators to help you with bad faith actors on all the platforms that we have or use in GNOME. You should stop going to hostile places. Seriously, just stop. Delete your account. It's important to do that. Don't do that. You should stop trying to correct people on the internet. Correcting the internet peanut gallery is not worth it. They will only waste your time because they know the value of nothing and the cost of absolutely nothing. Write down your position once and then leave. And never, ever, ever engage with bad faith actors. For them, it's a low-stake game. For you, it's a one-way ticket to an ulcer or to therapy. It's just don't do it. As I stated before, software development is deeply personal. So filter people, ignore them, block them, lock down issue when they start getting brigaded or their link gets shared in all the usual hostile places, and then move on. And if you're a maintainer, remember, you have the last word. The word may be no, much more often than it is yes, but you have that power. You have to respect different opinions, but do not be afraid to dissent. And you don't owe anything to anybody using your project. You owe even less to anybody not using it. If you do this, I will move to your project, or if you don't do this, I will leave your project. This is emotional terrorism. Do not negotiate. Thank people for their effort, then show them the door. And if you are a user, you have to respect the maintainer's opinion. And they are probably going to be around this longer than you will, and they will most definitely have thought about this longer than you ever did. So please respect. And in some cases, it's perfectly fine to fork stuff. I mean, yeah, you can fork GTK. It's a thing you can do. We use licenses that explicitly consider this as a fundamental right. We, as part of GNOME, are part of a political, ethical, and social movement that considers the right to take the code, read it, change it, and redistribute it as a fundamental part of life. do not be afraid of forks. If they are any good, somebody will use them for their personal betterment, and it's great. The user that pester you to change direction, they will move to the fork. Users that will look explicitly to what you provide will be better served by your focus. Everybody wins. If the fork isn't good, it's not going to impact you anyway. The onus of the fork is on the people that are making it, not the project that is being forked. The only thing you should do in case of a fork is to keep a line open to it, open to the fork projects. You have to make sure that the fixes that you make in the common place, in the common code, are shared, because that will make the life of everybody else easier, and it will also keep open the line for forks to be reintegrated back into the original project. Because remember, forking is a tough job. Forks will die. Often they will die even before they release anything worth of value, because the novelty wears out fast, and all you're left with is a project to maintain, which is not easy. And if you're not already used to maintaining a project, it's going to come crashing down you like a ton of bricks. When GNOME 2 got released, we had a single fork. There were 4 patches on top of a couple of components, GTK and GNOME panel, if I remember correctly. And they were mostly there to revert changes that were the result of the usability study from Sun before GNOME 2. Nowadays, it's hard to even find the fork on the Wayback Machine. By the way, shout out to my boy OGalaxio for GNOME. That was fun. When GNOME 3 got released, we ended up with actual fork. This is good. Now the people that like GNOME 2 can go and use Mate or Cinnamon or whatever else, instead of trying to derail GNOME development process to get back to GNOME 2, something we won't do. It's great. Everyone got what they wanted. But if you don't want that, maybe it's better to get involved upstream. Maybe you can convince the maintainer, or maybe you can change your mind, because now you get to look at the problem in a very different light. Nobody ever died because they changed their idea on a piece of software. Don't worry, you won't be the first. What will happen is that you will definitely learn something about software and about how to maintain it. Your opinions will start carrying more weight because you're now involved upstream. And you might end up being the next maintainer, because now you are an important piece of the puzzle. So I think I'm almost up in terms of time, but I have a final slide with a bunch of suggestions or topics or things that can happen to improve maintenance in GNOME. This is a bunch of things that I thought about over the past decade, probably. So one of the things that we could do to improve the situation is we should automate more stuff. Never have a human being do the job of a machine, because that is a boring job then, and it's not going to do anything to avoid you burning out. For instance, you could use a CI job for coding for checking the code style. We have a fairly consistent code style across all our projects. Doing this by hand is so boring that it's worth taking a hit to change the coding style you're using to make it machine parsable, so that we can do coding style checks automatically. But also we have a bunch of things like static analysis and using the sanitizers for memory and undefined behavior. Those should be automated as well. They should not be part of a manual pipeline. They should be done by a machine and give you reports on that so that you can easily fix things and you don't have to deal with the manual labor of doing that. We should use more bots. We have GitLab that has an API and that can be used, and it's important. So we should have a first triage. We should have review requests. We should have auto closing. We should automate more stuff like that. One thing that we should use, everyone, is the code owners file. It's a great little file. On one column, you get a path regular expression similar to the ignore file. And on the second column, you get the list of GitLab accounts that are responsible for that part of the code. So you put a bunch of files there that are in a subdirectory, and the people that maintain them, they are directly responsible. And if GitLab would ping the people whenever you open a merge request that involve those files, that would be awesome. I don't know if GitLab will ever do this, or if it's planned and just not available right now, but that would be a great thing to have. Improving our mentorship, like per project, not just as a global GNOME thing. Do review trading, document the decisions so that you document everything that happens there. Marketing your project better. Marketing in terms of letting people know what is happening on a monthly basis, on a weekly basis, on a release cycle basis, so that people always know what you're doing. GTK and the Shell have this development blog that is also syndicated on Planet GNOME. It's great. The tracker team is using Discourse to do this. It's also great. You should definitely look at that. And an important thing, I will never grow tired of saying this, you should stop reading the comments. Even like hate reading. I know I do it, but it's bad, because the Dunning-Kruger in the people that write the comments will lead to brain worms in the people that read the comments. It's a bad thing to do. Just don't do it. So I guess we're at the end. So thank you for listening to me rambling. And if you have any questions, that would be great. So I'm looking at the Etherpad. If you have any questions there, there's one. Maybe GNOME needs a standard pattern for documenting basic model processes so people know where to look. That's a good suggestion. That's absolutely true. Every project on GitLab has a wiki in theory, so people should start using it. I know that other I know that projects like GJS use what's it called? The markdown files in their documentation directory. They document some of the processes there because it's probably more convenient. That's another valid solution. What else? GTK has a bunch of text files there as well. We have a contribution guide. Yeah, the contribution guide. It's part of the UI when you open a project in GitLab. There are a bunch of links. One is for the README that is immediately shown. One is for the licensing, and one is for the contribution guide. It's a markdown file. You should outline how to start contributing to their project. For instance, how to open a bug, how to create your first patch, how to iterate and build the thing and then run the test suite and things like that. How to anything that is related to, I just want to change something in this project. How do I do it? That is the important thing. And just write it down, and GitLab will automatically link it if it's called contributing.md or something. It will automatically link on the landing page of your project. Other questions? I don't see them. From the chat. Maybe we need to ditch wiki.gnome.org. So from me personally, there's an enthusiastic yes, because wiki.gnome.org is terrible. The main problem of that is that all the wikis have different syntaxes. So we cannot just take the current content of wiki.gnome.org and put it somewhere else without having to spend a ton of time to do the port, which is, not great. Ideally, yes, we should prune the contents of wiki.gnome.org so only the reasonably up-to-date stuff is available. It happened a few years ago already, when it was restructured around having the projects, apps, and teams like main subsections. But yeah, I routinely find broken links or outdated pages that should be pruned and moved to the attic. And yeah, ideally, maybe we should have something a little bit better than Moin, because another thing of the Moin is, well, the wiki.gnome.org is that we are, to avoid spam, we are using this weird ACL that requires being part of a group, which requires somebody with editing privileges to add new users to it. It's a huge mess. It's not great. Yeah, I think also a lot of stuff in the wiki seems opaque and maybe isn't explained enough. Yes, it is. It is very true. I would say it's a wiki, so if you find something that is opaque and not explained enough, just start editing it. But that also requires going down a rabbit hole and finding things. So yeah, it would be good to have a better, some actual editing on the wiki, but maybe the wiki is not the answer at all. Maybe we need to have like per project, per project in the sense of GNOME, not per single project, per project, project-wide documentation that is less of a wiki thing. For instance, right now, the GNOME development documentation is hosted on GitLab. Maybe we should have a contribution docs repository that has a bunch of markdown, and you edit it by submitting merge requests, and you get reviews from it, and you explain things, and then we publish it using GitLab pages or whatever else. So let me see. Are we with time? I think, well, we have a break after that, but yeah. If anybody else has other questions, probably can go a little bit late, but otherwise we should enjoy the break and have dinner, in my case.
Thank you, Emmanuel, for the talk.
Thank you very much.
See you all after the break.